Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. Back to the MF-01X. This week it's bag D. There's a fair chance we'll be getting through the whole bag and end up with a rolling chassis. Last video we built up the rear suspension from bag C. A lot of this bag is quite similar. The main difference of course is the steering. Okay, let's see what Tamiya give us in this bag. There's some dense sticky back foam, a strip of double-sided sticky foam to hold the ESC and radio in, no doubt, the classic Tamiya motor plate, zip ties, springs, bag with final assembly bits, screws bag, and the drive shafts. As always, the bags get dumped into some pots so we don't lose anything. Right then, bag D, step 26. We need 2 self-tappers and the lower arm parts, 2 C8s, a C3 and a C4. The parts are quite clever. They interlock so the screw only has to stop them falling apart. It doesn't actually take any stress from the parts. This of course means you don't need to do up the screw incredibly tight, they just need to be nice and snug. Step 27. As the manual says, attaching front arms. We will start by finding the top arms, a pair of C18s. Not adjustable, which is good for the first time builder, but since we already built adjustable ones for the rear, it would have been nice to have some for the front as well. There's a couple of screw pins, inner drive cups, black shoulder screws, and 2 O-rings. First job will be fitting the O-rings to the cups. If you watched the last video you'll know all about that, but if you haven't, the idea is the O-rings stop the drive shaft from rattling around in the cups, which cause nasty sounds and excessive wear. Pop an O-ring in the end of the cup, then using one of the drive shafts press it down to the bottom. The O-ring should lie flat. If it doesn't, use some tweezers to fish it out and try again. The bottom arms get lined up on the chassis with the sweep towards the back, and a screw pin is inserted from the front. The manual wants some grease too, but as soon as it gets a bit muddy it will turn into grinding paste and wear the plastic in no time. So I just leave them dry. The screw pins only need to be done up just tight enough so they won't fall out, just nice and snug. The top arms get fitted with the shoulder screws. The shoulder is slightly deeper than the thickness of the arm, so you can do the screws up without worry about binding the arms. As long as the screws are bottomed out on the chassis, they'll be just fine. Last bit. The drive cups get inserted into the diffs. Since we're using proper bearings, there's no point in greasing them up. If anything, like the arms, the grease will pick up grit and cause more issues than it would fix. Step 28. Bright red front hubs. We've got F11 and F12. Keep track of which is which. They're going to end up attached to the 2 F1s. From the screws pot we'll need 4 kingpins, 2 brass ball ends, 2 outer drive cups and some bearings. Check the diagram and install the ball end into each of the hubs. Make sure you fit them to the right side. Pop a bearing onto the drive cup and install it into one of the hubs. Make sure you do this first as you can't get to them after. Not that I did that or anything. Now, this is a bit tricky. We need to fit the hub to the carrier. It slides in easy enough, but the kingpins are very tight to thread, and it's very easy to install them at an angle which will bind up the steering. Best advice is to make sure you have the best fitting screwdriver, tighten the screws in small increments and have both installed at the same time so they support each other. And of course, there's 2 assemblies to build. Step 29. Not too surprisingly, we're going to fit the hubs to the chassis. Just like the rear, we have a choice of high and low ground clearance. The Suzuki needs high. Right, we're going to need some shoulder screws, drive shafts and some screw pins. Line the hub up with the hole in the lower arm, insert a screw pin and tighten it up. Drop a drive shaft into the outer cup, tilt the hub to vertical and slot the drive shaft into the inner cup. The top arm just needs a shoulder screw to complete the install. The other side needs doing too. The only thing to be careful about is that you get them the right way round, but it will be pretty obvious if the steering arms are hanging out the front of the chassis. Last part is to clip the steering linkage onto the arm. Remember, the ball caps are quite soft, so clip them on by hand so you don't damage them. Step 30. Front dampers, which aren't actually dampers. We looked at these at the rear, so I'll just speed through the fronts. Parts required: C15, the caps, C7, some clips, C5, washers, C6, the bodies, C12, shafts, and then there's the springs. Right, the cap goes on the top of the body with the holes lined up. The clip runs through the holes, locking it together. Washer goes on, followed by a spring, then the shaft fits into the bottom of the body and a twist to lock it into place. Simple. They really are quick to put together, it's just a shame that there's no actual damping. Step 31. Fitting the dampers. From the F tree we need the F14 spacers, in bright red again, nice. 2 of the silver shoulder screws and 2 of the black ones. The top mounts with the silver screws through the damper, 1 of the spacers, then it gets fitted to the chassis. It's going into the hard plastic, so be careful you don't slip. The bottom just needs 1 of the black screws through the damper and into the lower arm. It's the same assembly on the other side, really straightforward. Step 32. Bumper and body mounts. We will of course need the front bumper, the 2 body mounts and 6 self-tappers. There's nothing complex about this bit. The body mounts slot onto their mounting points. They have a square mount so you can't really get them wrong. They get held on with 1 self-tapper each. Same goes for the bumper. The mouldings keep it roughly in the right spot while you do up the screws. A lot of thought goes into these unassuming parts. Step 33. Fitting the pinion. Since the pinion ends up being completely inaccessible with the motor fitted, Tamiya provide a little tool for setting the alignment. The motor comes with some rubber tube on the shaft for protection. They normally pull right off, but this one was a bit stuck. Easy fix though. Run a knife along the length of the shaft. Being really careful though. The shaft can turn, so there's a fair chance of stabbing yourself in the finger. We'll also need the motor plate, Allen key, pinion and the grub screw, which we will fit to the pinion right away. Pop the plate over the motor and line up the holes. Fit the pinion to the shaft and just lightly do up the grub screw just so it doesn't fall off. Fit the tool over the pinion with the grub visible through the slot. Move the pinion so it's up against the end of the tool and tighten the grub screw, making sure it's on the flat on the shaft. Really simple way to get the alignment just right. Remove the tool and give the grub an extra tighten. This one wants to be really tight. While we're here, we can bend the motor terminals. Because the chassis is so narrow, the wires would interfere with the rear wheels. Step 34. Fitting the motor. We don't need too many bits for this one. A couple of long machine screws, a self-tapper and the motor mount plate. There's also a little cover, but I'll leave that on the tree for now. Offer the motor up to the gearbox. Try and get the mounting hole somewhere near the right place. With 1 of the machine screws through the mounting plate, insert the screw through the gearbox and into the motor. It can be a bit of a fiddle getting it all to line up when you can't really see what you're doing, but if you wiggle it enough you'll eventually feel the screw drop into position. Do the screw up so it's just starting to squeeze the gearbox. The second screw is pretty much the same, keep wiggling until it falls into place. It'll get there in the end. Again, do it up so it's just going to grab the gearbox. Now we can set the mesh. The classic method of using a bit of paper won't really work here as you never get it out, so you have to do it by eye. Essentially, the idea is to get the pinion as close to the spur gear as you can, but without having the gears pressed together. There should be a tiny amount of slop. If they're too tight, the plastic gear will heat up and fail. It will make a pretty awful noise as well. If it's too loose, there won't be enough teeth in contact and the plastic gear will also fail. So it's important that you get it just so. When you're happy, make sure the screws are all nice and tight. Last bit, we need part A9, which screws into the gearbox to cover up the inspection hole. Next is the electronics, wheels and tyres. Now, I know I said we'd probably have a rolling chassis by the end, and we nearly do, but I've run out of time for this video, so come back next time and we'll get it rolling for sure. So, thanks for watching. A like is always greatly appreciated, and if you're not already, why not subscribe? Bye guys!